Okay, so we're going to try and talk our way through an approach to doing European research and use some examples that Bill and Peggy and I will talk about. Let me lay the land out first. When we how do I do this? There we go. No, that's not what it would be. Okay, so let's think about three different steps. The first one is this is not an easy task. So you really have to study carefully how to do research in your foreign location. It is not the same as doing it here. There are so many differences, and they're very specific, ranging from records being kept in the churches and not in the administrative locations, through to where my wife's family is from, which is up in Russian Poland, through to it was Poland, it was Russia, it was, you name it, it was it. So you really have to get your mind around how to do this. Spelling can be quite different, quite difficult. And we'll talk about how to do that. Then you have to start here, because what you basically need to know is as much as you can about the exact location your ancestor is from. With my wife's Polish ancestry, we finally were able to trace her to a village of about 200 people, which was important because that then led us to the parish and the county and all the rest. And then once you're comfortable that you have a pretty good shot at the location, you try to find some confirming data, and we'll show you some examples of that. So, two recommendations on doing research about a foreign country. The first one is just go to Family Search, click on what they call their Research Wiki, and then click on the region and country of interest. It gives you a good listing of sources of information. I'll give you an example later in the talk. And look for a website that specializes in the country. And most websites now that are geographically located in another country do offer an English version available as well as the national version. Then you ought to take the time to find a video as to how to do research in your country. And one of the best sources comes from an annual genealogy meeting called RootsTech. So if you search how to research, fill in the name of the country, family history, and then the word RootsTech, it'll bring up a whole batch of stuff on Google, and then hit videos, and it'll bring up the videos they've got. And they're very good videos. They're very useful. So how do you figure out where your ancestor came from? And the answer is you have to dig like the devil. Census records will give you a general answer like Germany or Ireland or something. Immigration records and naturalization records often get much more precise. And you'll see a couple of examples today. The church in this country or the cemetery amazingly can offer good information. There's a famous example where Barack Obama's Irish ancestry, the location that his mother's family was from, was found by somebody figuring out that the cemetery that the man was buried in was in the next county because they only lived a mile from the county border. Went over and looked at the cemetery and found his tombstone, which had the name of the village in Ireland he was from. Draft records often have a specific name. As a matter of fact, that's the place we first found the exact name of the town that my wife's grandmother's from, was from her brother's military name, draft record. People who applied for Social Security, if anybody was living in the late 30s, newspaper articles. Now, the other thing to remember is that people didn't migrate alone. They migrated with other people. And so if you can look around, even if you can't find the information for your relative, you may find it for a family member who may be a cousin or a person who came from the same community, and get close enough to do your research. Then you want to refine your knowledge. You want to look at Google for the parish and county associated. You want to look for name and boundary changes over time. You want to be sure you understand your ancestors' religion. In many European countries, there were more than one religion in that country. Now, if you were from Ireland, you are regular Ireland, you are probably Catholic. But if you're from Northern Ireland, you could be either religion. Then there are what are called surname maps. Now, we're not going to go into those now, but I put the website on here. If you look at those, they will let you look for the distribution of a name in a country. And that can be quite helpful. It doesn't help if your name is Schmidt, but I have a name we'll look at in a minute, which is Gluyas, Gluyas, which is English. And there's not a lot of people named Gluyas in England. Now, all of the things we'll talk about today are 19th century bordering into 20th century. From time to time, people want to go back to the old country for what I would call pre-1600 research. Good luck. You're almost certainly following lots of people who've been there already. You're going to be looking at lots of research that may have been published. Much of it will be unreliable. There was a period of time around 1900 when a lot of publications were done by, but let us say, people who took advantage. And they would prove that you were related to the kings of England, for example. Okay, I'm going to do a run through England. So we're looking for yes? Okay. We're going to be looking for the parents of Albert Gluyas. He is the great-grandfather of my grandson on his father's side.
How do I get rid of that?
Okay. Need to, somebody is okay, we'll stop that. Okay, so his birth record says his father was James Gluyas, his mother was Elizabeth Johns, and she's the one we'll be tracing. Okay. So here's the 1910 census. He was born in 1903. And you can see we have James and Elizabeth, John, Ralph, Theodore, by the way, and Albert. Okay, we got them. And they're both from England. Okay, they've been married 28 years and they had 4 kids. We can find their tombstones. There's James. Elizabeth is October 1865 to December 1920. And newspaper, here we are. Funeral of Mrs. Gluyas, the late Elizabeth Ann Gluyas. Mrs. Gluyas was born in the St. Just parish in Cornwall, England on October 2nd, 1865. And came here with her parents as a small child. Okie dokie. Are we all, I mean, you don't get better than that. Then in the same newspaper, or another newspaper, we found a thank you from the Mrs. Denning, Mrs. Gluyas, and John Johns, thanking them for the kindness showered on their mother, Anna. Okay, we now may have Elizabeth's mother. So when we look at the 1900 census, we find we have Anne. This is living in South Dakota, which is where they're from. And then her son, John P. and Mary J. And if you do a little bit of research, you'll find Mary J. is now Mrs. J. Denning. So this is the right family. John was born in England, Mary in Pennsylvania. Well, we saw a moment ago they moved to Pennsylvania. So if we now go back to the 1880 census, okay, we find Anne with Elizabeth A., Elizabeth Ann, John and Mary J., and they're all born in England except for Mary J., who was born in Pennsylvania. And when we in 1880 go look at Terraville in the Dakota Territory, down at the bottom here, we have John Johns, age 30, who's married and is a minor and born in England. Okay, so what we're looking at here is tracking family, okay? And indeed, when we now go back to immigration, we find John Johns, this is 1874, wife Nancy, Elizabeth, and John, all migrating together. And I know that Nancy is a familiar term, a nickname for Anne in that part of England, actually in England generally. Now, I'm going to just point out, this immigration record has 2 more people named Johns. So if we want to track Johns, the odds are pretty good that these 2 Jameses are from the same place John's from. That's family. So we find his tombstone, 1841 in Cornwall, England. That's consistent with Elizabeth. Died in 1889, which is why Anne's a widow. Okay. And I will say that if you do some basic research on this area, Lead, South Dakota, you'll find that there were lots of people from Cornwall there. Indeed, the local dish that they are noted for is a pasty, which is basically a piece of pastry filled with potatoes and meat that the miners would take into the mine. All right, now, if you're into England, this is your website. It's called Find My Past. It has tons of English data, well ahead of any place else you want to go. So what am I putting in here? I'm putting Elizabeth Johns, born in 1865, plus or minus a couple of years. And I'm in the parish registers for Cornwall. Okay. And here we are. We have Elizabeth Ann Johns, 1865, in St. Just, Cornwall. Sounds pretty close, doesn't it? And here's the full record. Elizabeth Ann Johns, baptized November 22nd, 1865. Okay, I'll buy that. Born October 2nd, that's about right for a baptism. Father's first name John, mother's first name Anne. If you remember, there was a second Elizabeth Ann here. She doesn't have the same parents, of course. So we know that this is the right one. And then finally, we're looking for a marriage between John Johns, and note here, it's recorded as John John, okay? And he is recorded in the 3rd quarter of 1865, okay? And the way that they do this particular database with civil marriages is they look at this page and say, who else is on the page? These 2 women were on the page. So obviously we're talking, or probably Anne Lowry. And the district is called Penzance, which if you look at the details, Penzance is the civil county that includes St. Just. Okay, so that's first shot at England. I will take a break here if anybody wants to ask a direct question. Otherwise, we're going to go to Germany next. Okay, Bill, tell me when to change slides.
Okay, go ahead, change, George. Yeah, this slide, just the main point here is just a little background. The German Confederation was formed in 1815, but the actual German state became around in 1871. And when doing research for your ancestors, anything from 1876 on, you can go to the local state or archives area, and there will be some usually records, very detailed records about the person, if they immigrated, when they immigrated, where they came from, etc. But prior to that period, like 1876, prior to that, you have to go back to like parish registers, things of that nature. So once again, it comes down to knowing the hard part of finding the place in Germany where your ancestor came from. Now, next slide, George. Now, for me, you know, I'm on my father's side, both my grandparents were Germany, and actually my wife's father immigrated from Germany as well. So we have a lot of German ancestors that we tried to trace. And where I usually had started was, I would start with the census records and going backwards from the last census before my ancestor died. And starting in 1850, of course, the census record started showing the place of birth. And typically you would see things on there like Germany or Prussia. sometimes Bavaria or Hesse, one of the German states. So it really varies depending upon where they came from. And as George mentioned, when ancestors migrated, they were in groups. So typically on the census records, you'll see the blocks of records of people came from the same general area. Of course, another good source is the death record or tombstone, like Find a Grave, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, which will give you a lot of times the birth date, the death date, and if you're lucky, some reference to place of birth. But typically, I've gone to either Ancestry or Steve, Ancestry or SteveMorse.org for immigration information. It has been very, very helpful. Once you get a name and the approximate time period from the census record as to when they emigrated to the US. Likewise, there are some publications out there, some books called Germans to America that are quite detailed, and they are available for search via a family search link, that where you can go Google Germans to America and then go in and search and sometimes they will give you the names that you're looking for and possibly the ship and the year that they came into the US. Next slide, George. Now, the online German records, family search, of course, is very, very good. I found, though, that I like family search, but looking at ancestors, there's a lot of duplication or inconsistencies. But what I do like about family search is their catalog, which is wonderful. To search on the place name, and that will list a series of options. So once you know your location, you can enter the city name, and it'll come up, and typically it'll show you church records that are available, either Catholic or Lutheran in Germany. And a key thing about looking at the records these days now is after they will show the film number where, in the 1970s, typically the Mormons went and photographed most of the records in Germany, with the exception of some areas like Bavaria, where they weren't allowed. But the records are in microfilm, but after the display line, you'll see some objects that might be an hourglass or a camera. And the hourglass is wonderful if you see that, because that means the film has been indexed and you can actually search for the name of your ancestor without looking at the film. The camera option afterwards means that you can view the microfilm online and scroll through it. But now sometimes you'll see that there's a key, a picture of a key afterwards, which means the records are locked and you can't view it online. You would have to go to the Family History Center over off of Guerneville Road in Santa Rosa to look at those. And obviously the records are in chronological order. So next slide. Now another website that is very helpful is GermanRoots.com, which is a website, and this will give you a good place to start searching if you know the ancestor and once again the area they came from. Now, likewise, there's the German archives for each state has their own archival office, and if you have no online records, you can contact, and I'll show you an example later on where I was able to contact them and show you the type of information that was available from the state archives in Germany. And once again, if you do the family search option there, it will show you Germany archives and libraries as to where they're located and how to contact them. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things about, as you may have already noticed, in Germany, when the people were baptized, either Lutheran or Catholic, usually the women were assigned the first name of Anna or Maria in a high percentage of cases. So you'll see things like Anna, Maria, Sophia, and then the last name. And what happens over time is a lot of times that first name, that Anna or Maria, will get dropped and they'll just be listed by their subsequent name after that. And also men typically had Johan or Johannes, which as a first name, followed by the main name that they went by. Likewise, Hans shows up frequently, which is a short form of Johannes. Once again, many times that is dropped. So if you're looking at for Johan Albert Johnson, a lot of times you'll just search for Albert and the Johan would have been dropped. Likewise, when you see an umlaut, which I think anybody who's looked at German records is familiar with the umlaut, the little dots over the vowel, you can replace that umlaut with the letter E. And originally when I started out, I put the umlaut in my records in family. I use Family Tree Maker, but now the standard convention is to get rid of the umlaut and replace it with an E. For example, an umlaut A would be an AE. And as mentioned, the Germans typically the records are either going to be Catholic or Lutheran meaning evangelical, sometimes referred to. Now, if you get into looking at the handwritten German records, if you go in and you're on family search and you start looking at film, you'll find that it's a mixture of German and Latin. So it's important to have available to you your Latin vocabulary, the German vocabulary, and the German alphabet. And believe me, the handwriting varies. It's difficult. And over time, though, you get proficient at trying to interpret the handwriting. Now, if you happen to, I don't know how many of you have been to this Salt Lake City Family History Library that the Mormon Church has, but they have an extensive library of books and all the microfilms are there. Likewise, they will do translations for you. So if you have a document, they have some help desks you can walk up to and they will help you and translate the records. Likewise, the local Family History Center may be of help. And many times there's a lady there named Wendy Wheelwright that speaks, I think, Polish and German, and is very, very good and willing to help. So
Yeah,
now, also the last point is that Germany has 16 states, which are listed once again to that link. So next slide, please. Now, what I was trying to do is one of my ancestors on my grandmother's side was a Ram, and her father was born as a child in Germany, and I should say his father was born. And I tried to backtrack. I was able to locate, his death record, and so I knew when he died in 1896. And I looked at census records, and when you look at the 1880 census, as you see here for Martin Rahm, you see that once again he's listed from Bavaria. Well, that gives me the state, but not much else to go on. So next slide, please. Now, the other thing that I looked for was I searched for immigration records, and I was able to locate a manifest record of showing from the ship that they arrived on. You'll see towards the bottom there, you'll see on line number 4, Martin Rahm, age 38, followed by Elizabeth and their children, Marie, Alois, Martin, Joseph, and Anton. And Joseph, it turns out, is the direct ancestor of mine. So, and you can see that their age, but once again, what was very helpful on this is like in the column to the right there, there's a town called, it looks like Langengrate. And I thought, bonanza, wow, this is terrific. All I have to do is find information on Langengrate. Well, unfortunately, what happened when they transcribed that, it was kind of a phonetic version of, because if you do a Google search for that town, you won't find one. So next slide, please. So what we did then is you can go in and on Ancestry and search under places, and you can see in the middle there, we search in Germany and Bavaria, and you can search in like the first part of the city name, like Langen, K. The G and the K sound very familiar. So I tried the K, and you come up with 3 options there. And it turns out, interestingly enough, I found out later on, the middle one is the exact town that they were from. And I'll show you how we arrived at that. Next slide, please. And so what I did is I knew at that point that he came from Bavaria, but I couldn't really tell for sure what town he was from. And so what I did is I contacted the Bavarian State Archives requesting any information they may have had. And they sent me well, I'll show you the attached information, which was very, very extensive. And I knew they were Catholic, but the Bavarian diocese did not allow the church records to be microfilmed. So I was going to be kind of stuck. So, but once I got the information from the state archives, I was subsequently able to go to the diocese in Regensburg, Germany, which is where the records for Bavaria are kept. And there they have the records on microfiche. And so over time, I was able to search once I knew the town and look at the records. And as a result of that, I was able to go back into the early 1600s. And like about 1600, as George said, is about as far back as church records go. And the same applies in Germany. Beyond that, it's really unknown. Now, interestingly enough, in going there, I was able to meet some of the other researchers there. And one of them introduced me to someone that it turns out it was a cousin, like a seventh cousin that I knew nothing about. And he had done extensive research locally, and he was able to share with me his records. And so my tree was just able to mushroom as a result of a few trips to Regensburg. And next slide, please. Now, I mentioned that when I contacted the state archives, they sent me back, I think it's about a dozen pages. And this is the beginning page, which shows and on the left is the German, on the right is my handwritten notes that I translated. And once again, you can use Google Translate, would help you translate some, but also in this case, I went to I happened to be in Salt Lake, so I went to the family history library there, and they translated for me. And it shows that this person came from the town called Herrenried to North America in 1862. And Herrenried is the village, but there's different churches within the area. But this was my starting point. And next slide, please. Now, this is another some more information. This is now like page 7, and it showed me that they had applied. And now, interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier that it's 1876 they have records on, but this happened in 1862 in Regensburg on the 2nd of April, and they had applied to emigrate. Now, one of the pages I haven't shown here was that they also showed that he was a farmer, how much money he had, how many guilders he had, how many children he had. Very, very helpful and good background information. And I've had a couple other people contact me regarding the state archives, the same situation. They knew they were from the general area, and they were able, through the state archives, to get a response. And I think, I can't remember how much, there was a little cost involved. It was either 15 or 30 euros, I think, to get this record. But believe me, it was time and money well spent. Next page, please. Now, another ancestor is, obviously my name is Bill Muller. And so this is a different German ancestor I had, Johan Anton Muller. And I had known quite a bit of information about him. Of course, he came in the 1870s, thereabouts, and 1875, in fact. And I had his death date, and I had his death record and so forth, but I couldn't trace it back to where he came from. And when I was in Salt Lake City one time, what I had done prior is I had Googled the Muller name, and it came up with a book which was called the Muller Family History. And in there, it showed a family tree of the Mullers going back to the 1200, but I couldn't find my ancestor in there. And the only name that matched was a Johan Anton Muller from Buckholt, which is up on the border by the Netherlands. But it said he went to Argentina. And I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble. But when I went to the, so what I did is I went back, I located his arrival date and found a cemetery record. And I went to the Family History Center and I looked through the Buchholz church records because I now knew from his tombstone and other information from his birth date from the record in the book. And I was able to locate him in the Buchholz records on microfilm, which was the link that I had been missing to connect going back to the 1200s. So it was really a gold mine. But once again, the key here was a combination of a book and the family history library. Okay, next slide, please. My last German ancestor came from another area up north, north of Stuttgart in the Hesse area, and came on my mother's side. And I had my third great grandfather who arrived in the US in 1832. And by looking at the census records and looking at his and his son's birthplace, it gave me the census taker's phonetic version again of the town and state. So I was lucky to come up with something that came close. And so what I would do is I would Google the town and come up with what I thought was really close because I knew he was from the Hesse area. And then I searched in Family Search under catalog. I found a town that matched on Google Maps. I searched that town in Family Search and it listed what was called an Ortssippenbuch, which is, Orts means a small town or village, and of course book. So it was a church ancestry, a printout of records of all the birth records and the ancestors going way, way back. And so but I could not get the book locally. It was only in Salt Lake City. So on another visit to the Salt Lake library, Family History Library, I located the book and I was able to go in and make copies of the pages there. And once again, it took me way back from the 1830s again, now back to the 1600s. So once again, it's the German, I haven't found any German websites per se that are helpful, but the state archives have been a nice link for me. So in any event, those are my thoughts on Germany, what's worked for me. So I'm open to any questions if you have any.
Okay, I'm going to wrap with Poland, and then we'll let Peggy talk for a few minutes, and then we'll go to full share time. As I said, my wife's grandmother was from Poland. Her brother came to this country. He was Boleslaw Barzakowski. She was Veronica. And in his marriage record, they listed his father as Ignacy and his mother as Mihalina, Hadnika, whatever. And so I've got good records here now. And that's important. Now, when you search on the immigration record, you find that he is listed as coming from Trevne, Russia. And Russia was at that point, that part of Poland was part of Russia. When you look at the actual record, the person who's listed as Boleslaw Barzakowski coming in on that date, his father is Ignacy Barzakowski, same name. So it turns out for a whole bunch of reasons, we know this is the right person. So we look up Trevne, and now I'm looking up Trevne in Wikipedia, just everyday Google search. It's a village in the administrative district of Kolno, which is in Podlaski, and I don't know how to pronounce that next word, but it's basically the state in northeastern Poland. So at that point, I went to Family Search Wiki and put in Podlaski, Poland, and you get an enormous list of information that's available. Down toward the bottom, they have online databases. And the one that I've just fallen in love with is Genetica. And this is Genetica, which has a choice between in Polish or in English. You can guess which one I pick. You pick your province, Podlaski. This covers all of Poland, and it also, they have some information for Lithuania. Okay, I then put in Barzakowski and Ignacy. And note, I didn't put the whole name in. They handle finishing up the name, sort of if it contains this, we like it. And Hadnik, that's again the start of the other name. And what pops up? In 1882, a marriage between Ignacy Barzakowski and Mihalina Chodnik okay, which I've discovered is actually the way this name is spelled in Poland, and their parish is Kolno, which, boy, sure sounds like the right place to me. So once this website appeared, it cut through because they have online a tremendous amount of information. I've got Mihalina's family back 5 generations from here. Ignacy's back 2. Turns out that the village that my wife's grandmother was born in was the Chudnik family village. So that was it. Okay, and then finally, a reminder, what we're talking about here keys off of getting as close as possible to the exact location. So please don't forget all the possibilities that you have and keep at it to try to get as close as you can. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And where did Peggy go? Peggy, would you like to unmute yourself and add something to our conversation?
Yeah, I actually have quite a bit, so I hope there's time for it.
Sure.
I didn't make it where I could screen share, but I have a lot of information. So I'm Jewish, and looking for Jewish records is different. My ancestors, I knew, came from what is now Belarus and what is Poland. And most Jews think that all the records were destroyed during wars, during World War II and the Holocaust, but they're wrong. So many records, especially civil records, still remain. Now, I was lucky in that I knew the towns, the name of the towns. My mother was born in a town called Mogilev in Belarus, and my father was born in a town called Zamość in Poland. And at the time, I mean, going back in the 1800s and 1700s, those towns were part of the Pale of Settlement that was created by Catherine the Great in Russia as areas where Jews could settle. Let's see. So I knew the name of the towns. One of my nieces had written up some stories when we had a reunion, and everybody contributed whatever they knew about the parents and the grandparents. So I began by entering that information into Family Search, but I wasn't happy with the way Family Search looked, and so I bought a subscription to Ancestry, which I liked much better. My cousin, one of my first cousins, sent me the Ellis Island information from about my father's immigration. So I started with all this information that I got from the family and entered all of that. And then I started using the hints that Ancestry provided, and I was able to go a lot further back into the past. Then I learned about some specific websites for Jewish genealogy. The most important one is called jewishgen.org, Jewish and then GEN.org. It's run mostly by volunteers, and I was able to get a lot of information from there. As I went back further in time using Jewish Gen, I found out that the earlier immigrants from Poland did not come from Zamość. They came from a small town called a shtetl, called Krasnobrod, which was located about 12 miles from Zamość. And I also learned about another very important website for Polish Jewish ancestry, and that is called jri-poland.org. And that's, again, another amazing website run pretty much by volunteers. From them, I was able to get a lot of vital records from Poland, going back on some lines to about 1725. And for Jews, you pretty much cannot go back further than the early 1800s or the late 1700s, because before that time, Jews did not have last names. And the naming pattern was that you would name a child after a relative, very often a grandparent who had died. And so everybody was like Harold, son of Moishe. So it got so confusing that you really couldn't go back further. Because they just had these patronymic names. So let's see. The only exception to this ability to go back further in time would be if you had rabbis in your lineage, because they kept really good records and you could go back much, much further. But I really didn't have any. So I joined on Jewish Gen, they have a discussion group. And through them, I get an email every single day from Jewish Gen discussion group. And other people are looking for information. And sometimes I was actually, by following that, able to find relatives who were looking for, help. And so I was able to add them to my tree. Let's see, where am I? Oh, one important thing was that I found that you could not, when you were going into Europe, you could not use the Americanized names that Jews took, because when they came to the United States, it looks like pretty much all of them changed their names and Americanized their names. So you had to use their Polish name or their Belarusian name in order to be able to find things. So that's what I did. Let's see. I found out that there were different groups on Facebook where I could meet possible relatives, and I did. So there's a group for people from the town of Zamish. There's a group for people from Belarus. There's a group called Tracing the Tribe, which covers everything, every country. Now, when it comes to my mother's family, they're the ones from Belarus. So they did not emigrate to the United States. They emigrated to Canada. And there I used Library and Archives Canada, which is gc-lac.gc.ca to get information for them. And I actually emailed them as well for help. As far as DNA is concerned, I use that too. So years ago, many years ago already, I did my DNA first with the National Geographic Genome Project, and they transferred my DNA to a family tree DNA, and they sent me matches. Later on, I did my DNA with Ancestry and then my heritage to get more matches. I use the matches in addition to my tree, and I have found that way. I've found many third, fourth, and fifth cousins that way. Let's see. And when I find somebody like that, I always ask them for pictures and information on their family, their spouses, their children, their brothers and sisters, and whatever. So I've added a lot of people to the tree that way, living people mostly. I also use the United States Holocaust Museum website and the Yad Vashem website to find out information about relatives who died in the Holocaust or who are survivors. I never knew that I had any relatives that died in the Holocaust before, but now I have found about 50 of them. None of them, thank goodness, close relatives. My uncle was a partisan in the forest in Poland during World War II, and he survived. I found records about him in a displaced persons camp in Germany from another website called the Arelson Archives. I was not able to go back as far in Belarus as I could in Poland because there is no specific website just for people looking for people in Belarus. Belarus is just more difficult, so I couldn't go back too far. I went back to about the early 1800s. So I contacted a person named Yuri Dorn who actually is from Belarus. I don't even think he lives there anymore, but he has lots of contacts. And he can find people records by searching the actual archives. in this particular district in Belarus. And so he does that for a fee. And he was able to confirm pretty much everything that I found in Belarus and add to it. So in the course of finding relatives, I decided to have 2 Zoom meetings with my relatives, one from my mother's side and one from my father's side. I also found, and they were wonderful. Everybody absolutely loved it. So I also found some relatives who were heavily into genealogy, and we have worked together, several of them, to help each other and to correct mistakes and everything that we can do to help each other to solve puzzles. So now I have so many relatives I never knew I had. And also I was able to figure out by relationship to a lot of people I knew about vaguely, but I really didn't know how we were related. And lots of the relatives have sent me pictures. So I have relatives all over the United States, Canada, and Israel, and possibly some in Argentina, but I found that very difficult in Argentina. So I used to think I had a very small family, but now I know differently. And that's the end.
Thank you, Becky. You'll note again that the key to this is we start by understanding the village we're coming from, and then we expand outward. I didn't talk at length about Trevne, but the church behind me, which I'm standing in front of, is actually the church in Kolno, the Catholic cathedral. This is would you believe, a Google Street picture. They drove through and took this picture. Okay, insane. I have found on DNA, as Peggy has, I have found a link to people who are in Poland, who are related to my wife. And so we've been able to do some talking back and forth on that. Once you find the name in the old country, boy, you can leverage that all day. Once you're in. So the key is getting to that village, getting that first confirmation, and then digging in. Okay, we're open. Anybody want to offer their own experience or ask a question or whatever? Or was it so obvious that now you just go home and do it this afternoon?
George, the only information I have about my mother's family is that they came from Cork, and I don't know if it's County Cork or the city of Cork, and I haven't had any success finding that.
Okay, have you, what's the actual name, Pat?
The last name was Coughlin.
Coughlin. Okay. Have you tried looking at the surname maps?
For Ireland? No, I didn't know about that.
Okay, well, if you look at that surname distribution map, it might help a little bit. Okay. It certainly helped with the Glewises because there are only 2 places in England you'll find the Glewises, and one of them's dead center on the place where Elizabeth Ann came from. So I think you would find that that might help.
I found his naturalization record, and there again, all it said was he was from Cork. It didn't specify city or county.
Have you found any other relatives who might have immigrated or with him?
I think I found a record for, I think his older sister.
Okay, because one of the things, if you'll notice, the home run on my wife's grandmother was from her brother. Okay, it wasn't her records. Her records were very difficult to interpret. Okay, yeah. But he had the village name on his draft record. He had the local city down, Trevne. It was all there. Okay, you just had to know where you were looking. But you know, you just keep looking, and that's all I can recommend. But do look carefully for possible family and people who might have immigrated with him, who may not even have the same last name. But if you look at the immigration record, for example, You
Yeah, I
know,
haven't been able to find his really.
well,
just-
then that would be a big task, because quite often on that same list with him will be other people from the same community,
Right.
because they will travel together often.
Thank you.
Other questions? We're keeping Nora awake. Hi, Nora.
Now, I'd like to ask Bill something. I've kind of got a very similar situation. My family is German, and I've been able to trace them back to Gerardstatten, which is a town in Bavaria, a small little village. But it sounds to me like you did an awful lot of visiting, both in Germany and to Salt Lake City, to find what you wanted to find. Is that correct? You're going to have to unmute.
Ahead. Yes, yeah, that is true. But the do you know, when you say Bavaria, do you know what's the largest city that they're nearby from that village?
Probably Stuttgart, I would think. Yeah.
Well, Stuttgart would be north, probably in a different, more like Hesse. But any event, what you might consider, once again, do you know when your ancestor came over to the U.S.?
Yeah, he came over. Actually, he crewed on a ship and floated around on the ship for a number of years, and finally got off in New York City in the late 1850s, early 1860s.
Okay. There's a possibility that if you contacted the state archives and requested some information, they might have a record. It turns out mine was from like 1862, and they had a record of emigration. Now, they might, for anybody to leave the country, they probably would have had to apply somewhere, even though he's working on a ship. But yeah, it's hard to make that connection.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Uh, One thing to remember is since Bill and I did research years ago, a lot of those microfilms are increasingly online. Remember that one of the objectives of Family Search is to get all their microfilms online, whether they're indexed or not. And then the ones that have that little key overhead, which means that you don't get into them unless you're in the Family History Center. The good news is the Family History Center is open again, finally, after what all of us have been experiencing for the last 2 years. So you can just wander down the other end of town, and they do have people who can handle German and can help take a close look. Okay, I heard a voice coming.
George, it's Nancy.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this maybe is really simple, but I'm doing all of this research in England, and there are all sorts of indexes, death indexes, birth indexes, marriage indexes. But what the indexes fail to show is the parents. And I'm wondering if there's some easy way to access that information other than writing for a birth certificate.
Well, it depends on which region you're looking at. If you remember the records I had from Cornwall, they had parents in almost all the records. So have you used Find My Past?
No, but I'm going to after we
Yeah,
hang up.
I think that's where you want to go, because they have much better, they get finer in the detail of what they've got.
I see neatly handwritten lists, very well, good penmanship with names and dates.
Okay, well, take a shot at Find My Past and see what you can find.
Thanks.
I see Nora with her hand up. Nora, hello.
Hello, I just wanted to ask Pat a few questions. Did he get married in the USA? And if he did, have you got his marriage certificate?
You're asking Pat, right?
Asking Pat, yeah, it's for her Cork ancestor.
You need to unmute, Pat.
Mayor, no, I don't think, oh yeah, I do, actually. He was married in this country, in the United States.
Well,
'Cause he was
usually
only-
that gives the name of the parents.
Yes, possibly. I can't
So you have
remember.
the parents and you have a time frame. And if he was born after 1864, those records, those legal records are online in Irish genealogy.
What would you look for his parents, you mean?
Well, the parent's name should be on his marriage record, his legal marriage record, not a church one.
I found it for a different relative that was married in the United States. I was able to trace her family through the marriage record back to that a
Yeah.
different part of Ireland.
And what time was he, what period was he born in, do you think?
Around, well, two different answers to that, and I'm not sure, 1825 or 1832. And
Okay, so,
he came here according to the immigration petition in 1846. So he was either a teenager or in his early 20s, depending on which birth date.
yeah, okay. You need to get the legal marriage and get his parents' name, although that's kind of early
Mm.
for that specification. But if you want to get in touch with Peggy Cummins, she can give you my email address and I'll help you out as
Oh.
best I can.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. Yeah, County Cork is just so large. I couldn't pinpoint, it's all parish records and I don't know what parish he
Well,
belonged to.
this is it. We've got to, but you see, when George suggested the surname book for that particular surname, that's not a great idea because you have several ways of spelling it. And
Right,
it
I know.
also has secondary forms.
I know.
And you can
I've
get
seen
3 or
that.
4 variations of the baptism of the one family, which I think some people making the dictionaries don't appreciate the technicalities of surnames in the West Cork area or in County Cork or in other parts of Ireland. But if you get in touch with Peggy Cummins and we can then get in touch with each other and I'll do what I can to help you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I have a lot
Okay.
of Irish relatives, but this particular one is the one I can't really find specific.
And that's the annoying one, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, any other inputs, comments, questions? Okay, well, next month is going to be really interesting for me anyway. We're going to tackle how to get into the 1950 US Census.
Oh,
The 1950 US Census is being released on April 1st. Our meeting will be March 28th. And 4 days later, we will be able to sign on. And at least if you're my age, you'll be in it. Okay? Or your family will be in it, or your grandparents will be in it, or your uncles and aunts. And I'm going to have a list a mile long about who I want to look up. And there are going to be some tricks involved in looking them up because when it's released, it will not have a good index. The index will be developed over the next 3 to 6 months. And I'm not going to wait 3 to 6 months. I'm going to go ahead and try to find my family first. So plan to join us. And then what we're going to do in April is we're going to talk about what we found out. Okay, just the fun of looking at family in 1950. And finally, in May, and Peggy, you'll be on the line for this as I think Bill's going to be. In May, we're going to talk about contact with people in the old country. And the visits we've made, the people we've contacted, how that's worked, not so much from a process viewpoint, it's just the fun of talking about it. Okay, we've had a lot of fun with it and I hope others have as well. So thank you all and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.